Everyone feels it's their right to get running water when they turn on a tap, just as we all assume a flick of a switch will produce light. These are public services we take for granted. You would think that as a resident living in this country, it is right and proper for the country to provide you safe, continuous, and affordable utility services. But you never had a single thought that maybe one day your domestic companies are actually no longer responsible for running the crucial services we live by. Instead, most are now owned by private foreign companies. Foreign-owned businesses are now everywhere in this country. Lotus, Jaguar Land Rover, Boots, Asda, and telecoms giants O2, etc. are owned in foreign hands. Even Tetley Tea, there's nothing more British than Tetley Tea, is owned by Indian conglomerate Tata. Not to mention the massive Chinese takeaway at each corner of your streets. However, you can give up the Chinese takeaway, but you cannot live without your water, gas, electricity, etc. While an incredibly vast scale of UK utility business is now in Chinese hands. Not only Chinese, in fact, to date, the British have sold more than half of their utility assets to foreign owners. 20 years ago, less than a fifth of the UK stock market was foreign-owned. New figures published by the Office for National Statistics show that the proportion has risen to 53.2%, which is a rise of nearly 10 percentage points in just 3 years. For the first time in history, UK PLC is majority owned by foreigners. It seems not that bad to have overseas ownership of the department stores, luxury goods makers, or football clubs. But people feel very differently when it goes to their public services. Since privatization, Britain's gas and electricity supply industry has become substantially foreign-owned. 2/3 of the UK's electricity is generated by overseas firms. Australian, Dutch, Malaysian, French, and Hong Kong-based companies own the water suppliers. Some of the biggest players, perhaps surprisingly, are the Chinese. One Chinese in particular, Li Ka-shing, the richest Chinese business tycoon, is ruling a giant utility kingdom across this country. Li's investment career in this country can be traced back to 1990s, when he bought the Orange mobile phone service and then sold it 6 years later for a profit of £10 billion. In the last 5 years, Li Ka-shing has invested more than £31 billion into Britain, which equals to 1/3 of Li's worldwide investments. This Hong Kong-based business giant has snapped up 11 infrastructure projects in Canada, Australia, and the UK. Britain is on the top of his priority list. To date, Li Ka-shing is controlling 1/4 of the gas market, 30% of the electricity supply, and providing water for more than 7% of the population of Great Britain. The UK Power Networks Holdings Limited, which Li bought in 2010, serves more than 8 million British residents. The Wales and Western Utilities, whose gas pipeline networks covers 1/6 the size of the British lands and serves about 7.5 million people in this country, is also under his control. Now, Li Ka-shing is bidding for one of the 3 giant train leasing companies, Porterbrook. And if he does succeed, can you imagine his influence in this country's public service provision? Look at your water bill. Probably your tap water is under his control too. It is well known that China, as one of the fastest growing economies on the planet, with its 1.3 billion population and a relatively undeveloped market, offers a huge opportunity for British businesses. People are trying hard to worm their way into this huge market, while Li Ka-shing, one of the shortest traders in the world, keeps dumping his market share in China and turns to Britain to invest his money. Then why did he target Britain as a destination for his international investment? And why does he specifically choose utility industries, such mature industries without obvious high profit but strictly regulated business, to develop his business in this country?
The ultimate goal of businessmen is chasing profit. Firstly, Hong Kong-based Lee is familiar with the business environment of Britain and Commonwealth countries, and the positive investment environment within the mature legal system in the UK is a plus. Secondly, this is the perfect time to invest in the UK after the 2008 financial crisis, which hit the whole of Europe, including Britain. In order to reduce the debt, lots of state-owned assets in the country have been sold, and Britain is also very keen to attract overseas investment to reinvigorate its outdated infrastructure. As for Lee's choice of industries, infrastructure investment is not a high-profit option in the traditional sense, but it can provide long-term profit in a stable environment with relatively low competition. Despite the recession, there's no doubt that everybody still requires utility services. In addition, Lee recruited the most professional team in Britain to run the business for him. The famous business giant also has personal connections with political leaders, including the Prime Minister. Nobody can ignore his powerful networking, even in this country. Last but not least, China is witnessing a new round of socio-political recovery, and Hong Kong is faced with its 2017 electoral reform. It is understandable that Li Ka-shing is to reduce his shareholdings in China, given the ever-changing situation, and develop his new business empire in a relatively more stable environment.
No wonder British presses screamed that Li Ka-shing had bought almost a half of Britain. It's probably no exaggeration to say that Li, to some extent, is dominating the British economy and people's livelihood. It's already the case that overseas investors are getting more and more involved in British utility companies. Then what happens when most of Britain's essential public services are no longer run by the British? Is it a case to worry about? Alex Brumer, city editor of the Daily Mail, warns in his new book called Britain for Sale that with so much of our vital utility companies in foreign hands, the British are now at the mercy of conglomerates that could bring Britain plc to a shuddering halt. The basic tension lies in the conflict between operating a company to make a profit and to ensure that the interest of the greater good of the state and the welfare of the consumers top the list of priority. Then what is the truth? How well are your utility service suppliers doing? Let's take Essex and Suffolk Water, one of the foreign-owned water suppliers for Suffolk and Norfolk regions, as an example to have a look. Essex and Suffolk Water is part of the Northumbrian Water Group, established after a merger in 2000. They supply water to 1.7 million people in the Essex, South Norfolk and North Suffolk area, with 95% of water taken from the region's rivers and reservoir. Northumbrian Water Group is currently owned by Chang Kong Infrastructure Holdings, the largest publicly listed infrastructure company of Li Ka-shing in Hong Kong, which bought it in 2011. CKI acquires 100% ownership of Northumbrian Water Group via its UK subsidiary companies. The majority of Northumbrian Water's board of directors after this acquisition are designated by Li Ka-shing's CKI and enjoy the dominating decision-making right. The Chinese group is naturally secretive and unwilling to talk about the personal aspects of the ownership issue. In fact, it seems the company never normally gives interviews on this subject to any branch of the media. British people, though, might be excused for thinking they have a right to know more about the people who control such vital services.
I didn't know that my water supply was supplied or owned by a Chinese company.
No, I never knew that Essex and Suffolk was taken by Chinese people. I thought my water supply was English.
It's always the English people that have done all my bills, so I would be a bit apprehensive about somebody else doing it.
With a relatively respected regulator Ofwat, the water industry is generally recognized as attracting less criticism than some other services. The exception is the notorious case of Thames Water, while it was owned by German utility company RWE. By 2005, Thames' profit had soared by 30% to £346 million, helped by a 21% price rise for customers approved by Ofwat. Yet that same year, the company's pipes were in such a bad state of repair they were leaking 196 million gallons a day. Then how does the regulator protect people? And to what extent can it be trusted?
A regulator for each sector has been put in place in the UK, and for water it's Ofwat. And then they have duties, and their primary duty is to protect the interests of consumers or customers. Now that partly doesn't mean they ignore the companies, because if the companies can't make enough money, then they may go bankrupt, and that isn't in the interests of customers. So although the focus is on customers, it's very much a balancing act between what is it that the companies need, how much money do they need to run their business if they are efficient. And we're right now in the process of setting the price caps, the constraints on prices for the next 5 years, from 2015 to 2020.
Maybe an expert with professional background from Ofwat is needed to price the water. But why should the local customers pay more for their domestic water while things are different in the foreign owner's hometown? Daily Mail revealed in 2006 that while the average Thames Water customers pays £265 a year, residents of the chief executive's hometown, Larne, paid well under half that amount for a first-class modern networks.
There's always this worry of, is there enough investment? So we don't want to drive prices right down in the short run if it means that there's not enough investment and the water supplies fail in the longer term. In terms of whether price increases are higher in one country or another, I think that's likely to depend both on how costs are in each of those countries, because we don't have a single market in either energy or water, and so you'd expect costs to vary between different countries. But also costs or prices may be kept too low in other countries, so it doesn't necessarily mean that because price increases are higher here, there's exploitation here. What matters is, are they high here relative to what an efficient level of costs would be, and passing those efficiencies on to consumers.
It goes without saying how much the local beer business relies on a reliable water supply. For Suffolk and beyond, they won't be happy if the price of their favorite Adnam beer goes up because of a water price hike.
Water is absolutely critical to our business. We make about 30 million pints of beer a year, and we use about 3 pints of water to make 1 pint of beer. So we're probably using about 90 million pints of water a year.
The importance of the stable and reasonable water price is obvious for your local water-dependent business, either in the past or the present. The ghastly publicity of Thames Water in 2006 finally forced Philip Fletcher, the Director General of Ofwat, to confront the issue. Though he accused the company of profiteering, can he really stop water companies' malfeasance or prevent it by blocking undesirable acquisitions?
We want to make sure that you have good governance arrangements within your company. And in a sense, that's not so much to do with regulation, but we license these companies to provide water. So if they're not doing their job properly, they'll lose their license. And so they won't be allowed to supply water anymore, and that license will then be given to somebody else. I don't think that the regulator on its own can stop a merger if it thinks that it's not a good idea, but it can refer it to the Competition and Markets Authority, and they have the power either to stop it or to require remedies, that is, perhaps somebody divests some other assets.
Of course, any mess in utility industries is the last thing we want to face, but it could happen, especially when we're stuck in an economic block. The German owners of Thames Water bailed out and sold the company in 2006 for £4.8 billion after several years of criticism of its failure to meet water pipe leakage targets. Overseas enterprises always have the option to jump out from the mile. When it does happen, is it affecting the public services? And who can pick up the pieces?
If the regulator could see signs of a company failing to provide the outcomes for the customers, then it would intervene and would start negotiating and ultimately could remove the license and give it to somebody else. Would there be any effect on the customers? Probably there would. Probably prices would be higher than they otherwise would, and perhaps part of what might be noticed is that there's poor service. And so that might be one of the symptoms. If suddenly, they're not mending their pipes quickly enough or managing their water supply. But we would see that, the regulator would see that through the various mechanisms that it has for monitoring the industry.
Right behind me is the Abberton Reservoir. It cost the Northumbrian Water Group £160 million and serves more than 1.5 million customers in Essex. From the way that Northumbrian Water Group is performing as a foreign-owned water company, there's no clear disturbing evidence to suggest that the public is losing out. Heidi Mottram, OBE, CEO of Northumbrian Water Group, it's clear that their company is making substantial reinvestment in science of water treatment.
We really, as Northumbrian Water, love the idea of putting science to good use. As a water and wastewater company, we already employ quite a lot of scientists in our business because producing water takes lots of analysis and different treatments. So, that's the science really put to great use in the communities for providing great quality drinking water and treating wastewater in this project.
Even if you do feel secure with your overseas water suppliers, many people still worry about their energy providers. British energy suppliers could also be vulnerable to global political rows, particularly since Russia started piping oil and gas across the Ukraine and Europe to UK customers. The ease with which Russians could use their huge energy resources as a political weapon by turning off gas taps to the Ukraine is frightening. If they could do it to the Ukraine, some fear, there's nothing to prevent them doing it to the Brits one day, and the current conflict and the tit-for-tat sanctions make that increasingly likely. In the future, will it even be possible to separate essential services from the drive for profit, or even from the imperatives of international relations in a time of war?